Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he wants to strengthen bipartisan support for the Jewish state during his visit to the U.S. this week. Netanyahu will be offering new hope to bring the hostages home.
The Prime Minister will have a challenging political landscape to navigate during his visit to Washington. Chris Mitchell brings us the details from Jerusalem.
In Washington, Netanyahu met with families of some of the hostages.
We're determined to bring them all back. The conditions to bring them back are ripening for the simple reason that we're putting very, very strong pressure on Hamas. We're seeing a certain change, and I think this change will grow. We intend to do it. This is a war objective.
Tragically, the IDF announced 2 more hostages were confirmed murdered by Hamas in captivity. Former U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman sat down with CBN News to talk about what Netanyahu wants to accomplish in the speech and in Washington.
What he's trying to accomplish, on this extremely large stage, maybe the biggest stage in the world, is to really explain Israel's position, explain what happened to Israel on October 7th, the trauma this inflicted on the Jewish state, the Jewish people, the inhabitants of Israel, how Israel has done its best to minimize civilian casualties, but how Israel views this as an existential battle where victory is the only option. And I think, he is uniquely qualified to make that case.
The Times of Israel reports Netanyahu's meeting with President Biden may now take place Thursday instead of today because of the president's COVID diagnosis. Netanyahu is also expected to meet at some point with Vice President Harris, expected to be the Democrats' presidential nominee. And he may meet with the Republican nominee, former President Donald Trump. With all of the changes going on among Democrats, Netanyahu has to navigate a difficult political landscape.
It is a highly charged, time in American politics right now, and he'll try to thread that needle in a way where he can check in, offer his good wishes, make the case for Israel, but try not to provoke, the kind of political responses that we see too often here at this time. So it's a tough job. It's a needle threading job but he's pretty good at that. He's done it before.
On his departure from Israel, Netanyahu said he wants to emphasize the bond between the two nations.
In this time of war and uncertainty, it's important that Israel's enemies know that America and Israel stand together today, tomorrow, and always. Thank you.
Well, for more on this story, Chris Mitchell joins us now. Ambassador Friedman says Netanyahu wants to emphasize that Israel is fighting for its existence. Will he talk to Congress about the threats from Iran and Hezbollah and others?
I think he's definitely going to do that, Gordon. Before he left, he talked about, Israel's facing a seven-front war. Well, what does that mean? That means Hamas, Hezbollah, militias in Iraq, Syria, the Houthis, the terrorist groups in Judea and Samaria and Iran itself. So really, it's this ring of fire by Iran, and Israel finds itself literally fighting for its existence. You have tens of thousands of Israelis on the northern border and the southern border that are just depopulated areas. Just before he left, he ordered an attack, that is Netanyahu, after hundreds of attacks by the Houthis, and then the Houthis landed a drone inside the heart of Tel Aviv. Also, there's thousands of rockets from Hezbollah. Iran reportedly just recently is 1 to 2 weeks away from enriched military-grade uranium. So I do think definitely, Gordon, he's going to make the case to the Congress and the American people what Israel is facing right now and what it's been going through for the last 9 months.
Well, let's talk about the Houthis, and I don't know how you can discuss them without getting partisan. Under President Trump, they were labeled a terrorist group. Yemen was labeled a terrorist state. One of the very first things the Biden administration did was to decertify that and say they were no longer considered a terrorist state or a terror group by the State Department. The reasoning behind that was so that American humanitarian aid could go into Yemen. But, just this past week, we still have the State Department debating, is it a terrorist state as it's launching missiles against U.S. vessels in the Mediterranean? It just makes no sense to me that, they would continue to debate the existence that this is a terrorist state. How in the world can he thread that needle?
Well, you know, as you said, right after Biden, the administration got in, they decertified, they took the Houthis off the state-sponsored list. A lot of people are scratching their heads, certainly here, and I think some in Washington as well, what they've been doing for the last, since November. I think almost like 40 incidences in the Red Sea where they've attacked global shipping. You know, 30% of the global shipping goes through the Red Sea, and it actually has had an impact on Egypt because 25% of their revenues of the shipping goes through the Suez Canal. That has dropped in the last several months, and they just keep doing this at will. The attack by Israel was a significant one. It hit a fuel depot and a port that the Houthis were using, Iran was using, to resupply the Houthis. So Israel really hit them hard after literally a couple of hundred projectiles that the Houthis have been firing against Israel, in addition to all the things that it's been doing about shipping in the Red Sea.
Well, here's another one. I don't know. I'm just in a provocative mood today. UNRWA, UN Relief Works Agency, under Trump was defunded. He said, I can't in good conscience continue to fund this group. They have no intention of peace. They are preaching ideology to the school kids. Now it turns out that UNRWA was actively hiding terror tunnels, terror command and control stations right underneath their floor. And UNRWA employees were part of the terror group that attacked Israel on October 7th. So how can you avoid the connection that U.S. citizens are being held hostage today in Hamas tunnels, and those tunnels were built with U.S. taxpayer money? How can you avoid that?
Yeah, that's exactly what a lot of people over here are saying. In fact, just yesterday, the Knesset, they declared UNRWA a terrorist organization. They severed ties with UNRWA. What they also did, Gordon, was they revoked the privileges of UNRWA and many of its workers. They revoked its tax-exempt status. One member here was saying in the Knesset that UNRWA has really been a fifth column inside Israel. Another said, you know, they were just a terror organization sitting right under our noses. That curriculum that you talked about is being taught right here in schools in Jerusalem and in Judea and Samaria. And you know, as you said, many of the measures also noted that UNRWA employees, 10%, according to some people, participated on October 7th, murders and kidnapping. And right now in the Knesset, it was a joint on both sides of the aisle. The coalition and the opposition voted for this restrictions on UNRWA, at least here in Israel. We'll see what the Congress will do and the administration in regards to UNRWA as well.
I looked at the vote totals, and it was practically unanimous, but there were still, you know, roughly 10 votes on each one of the measures voting against it. Who was voting against it?
Well, perhaps some of the Arab members of the Knesset. I wouldn't say, I couldn't see why any others would not vote against it, but it was about 60, I think so, or maybe 8 or 9 or 10 that voted for it, you know, against the measure. But some people said that it's been so many months, why would Israel even wait this long? But some people say at least they made a decision about what to do with this UN organization that's been entrenched here in Israel for decades.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the Arab members of the Knesset. In the supposed apartheid state, Arab Muslims have full participation in the government and are elected to the Knesset, and it just you know, the current lies coming out of the terror groups are just, we've got to name it for what it is. It's a lie. Well, unlike me, Netanyahu is trying to stay neutral in his visit to the U.S. What is the current thinking in Israel on Kamala Harris? What would her policy towards Israel be if she's elected president?
Well, I think they feel over here it's going to be a shift away from Biden's policy toward Israel, more in line with the progressive wing of the Democrat Party. You know, she's been the leading advocate in the administration for a ceasefire in Gaza, and some would expect over here that she would even put more pressure, other than Biden and Blinken and others in the administration, to end the war. And I think that, you know, she wants to end the suffering of the Palestinian people, which is something people here in Israel want to do, but they want to defeat Hamas first. Friedman, in our conversation, he said there's really a stark contrast between Trump and Harris, and he actually feels because she's not going to be there on tomorrow, Gordon, she's the president of the Senate and would likely proceed over the joint session, but she's going to miss that. He thought it was a bit of an insult and avoiding the picture of her sitting behind Netanyahu while he delivers his speech.
Well, she's doing so for political reasons. She needs the votes in Michigan, so she can't be applauding Netanyahu standing behind him, and if she doesn't applaud, then she loses another group. So it's I see behind that it's a lot of politics, which just goes to show we need prayer, and we need to be praying for Netanyahu. We need to be praying for our own country, and we need to be praying for the peace of Jerusalem. Last question. You're a watchman on the wall there in Jerusalem. What's the likelihood of a war with Hezbollah in the coming months?
Well, what I've been hearing, Gordon, is that a war may begin in the next few weeks, but if it doesn't, then it might begin in the spring. And this is the kind of reasons I've been hearing. First of all, if it begins in the next few weeks or a little longer, that means the war will likely go into the winter, a very difficult time for the IDF to be fighting in South Lebanon. The other thing is the possibility of the Iron Beam. This is the laser anti-missile defense system, may be online in a couple of months. And also, they're looking at November, and if they see if the Trump administration is elected, then it's going to be a much more favorable ally in its fight against Hezbollah. So that's why I've heard spring is what may be a time for a war with Hezbollah. But definitely there are sense here, Gordon, they have to do this. They have to defeat Hezbollah. They can't have tens of thousands of Israelis indefinitely staying away from their homes. And I would add this, Gordon, today actually is what's called the Fast of Tammuz. It begins a 3-week period of mourning for the Jewish people, commemorating the destruction of the first and second Jewish temples and many other calamities for the Jewish people. It ends on Tisha B'Av, that's the 9th of Av, and many people say it's a very important time to be praying for Israel, the Jewish people, and the peace of Jerusalem.
Well, we'll join you in that prayer, and I encourage Christians around the world. We need to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and we need to be praying for Israel now in our time of need. Chris, thanks for your insight, and stay strong. You can watch Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech to Congress Wednesday afternoon. CBN News will be covering his address live on the CBN News Channel and also on YouTube. You can also download the CBN News app. You can get it on any smart device, phone, tablet, or smart TV, and you can watch his address live. In other news, Vice President Kamala Harris has already wrapped up the Democratic presidential nomination. She did it in record time, 32 hours from the announcement. John Jessup has that story and more from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
Thanks, Gordon. The vice president campaigns in Milwaukee today after securing enough delegate support to be the nominee, according to a survey by the Associated Press. That word comes as top Democrats quickly coalesce to endorse her candidacy in an attempt to put weeks of political infighting over President Biden's political future behind them. However, Harris's nomination isn't officially locked up just yet. Recent polls give former President Trump a slight edge over Harris, but it's likely to take some time before surveys give a better idea of where the race truly stands. Well, here in Washington, House Speaker Mike Johnson and Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries announced this morning they'll create a bipartisan task force to investigate the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. The two leaders are calling the security failures to protect the former president shocking. Their statement comes after the Secret Service director faced tough questions from members of Congress Monday amid calls for her to resign. CBN's Tara Mergener brings us that story.
In a packed hearing room, Director Kimberly Cheadle faced bipartisan criticism over how her agency handled security before a 20-year-old man shot Trump from a nearby rooftop. As lawmakers continually asked who is responsible at the agency and whether she should keep her job, she continues to refuse to resign.
Our mission is not political. It is literally a matter of life and death.
In her first public appearance since the rally, Secret Service Director Cheadle promised to move heaven and earth to ensure what happened July 13th will never happen again.
I have full confidence in the men and women of the Secret Service. They are worthy of our support in executing our protective mission.
Cheadle is facing multiple calls from Republicans and at least one Democrat to quit, given the events and failures of that day.
We almost lost a presidential candidate the other day.
Committee Chairman James Comer praising efforts by Secret Service agents while questioning Cheadle's leadership.
While we give overwhelming thanks to the individual Secret Service agents who did their jobs under immense pressure, this tragedy was preventable.
While Cheadle insists agents would not have allowed Trump to take the stage if they knew of a legitimate threat, critics point to media reports and video footage showing that Secret Service, law enforcement, and even rally-goers knew of the threat at least 20 minutes before shots rang out.
Now, the rally was not paused at that point, correct?
No.
And she was asked why Secret Service didn't put personnel on the roof of the building the gunman occupied.
I mean, you could have put Barney Fife on the roof and kept somebody from getting up there.
Cheadle was also asked about the 1-minute delay in removing Trump from the stage after he was hit by a bullet. Matthew Crooks fired 8 shots before a Secret Service sniper killed him with a single bullet. In a heated exchange with House Judiciary Chair Jim Jordan, Cheadle insisted past requests for additional security by Trump's campaign were not denied.
Well, is Mr. Guglielmi your spokesperson? He said he acknowledged the Secret Service had turned down some requests. I'm asking how many?
A denial of a request does not equal a vulnerability.
Republican and Democratic leaders of the House Oversight Committee, Representatives James Comer and Jamie Raskin, say they will send an official letter calling for Kimberly Cheadle's resignation. In Washington, I'm Tara Mergener, CBN News.
Thanks, Tara. Gordon, a lot of questions that still need answering.
And that it will be ongoing. The Speaker of the House, Johnson, along with the Minority Leader, Jeffries, have agreed to form a bipartisan committee to look into it and to look into exactly what happened at the Secret Service, why there wasn't an agent on top of that roof. And we're going to be spinning out all kinds of stories as to why. You know, what was the motivation here of a very young man? And, you know, I'm already, the internet is already trying to make a great deal out of so-called encrypted platforms that he was using on his phone and trying to make those some kind of encrypted bank accounts as if he was paid by a foreign government to do it. All of these things are going on. My view of that, it was encrypted platforms for searches and messaging. But what exactly were the messages is a very open question. And with it being encrypted, there are now some 30 organizations the FBI has subpoenaed, trying to get at the bottom of it. But that's going to be an enduring question. Why? What was his motivation? And how did he get so much access where he's able to go to Home Depot, buy a ladder, put it against a building as a candidate for president is getting ready to speak, and nobody says anything? It does boggle the mind. Why? And what were the failures on the Secret Service? We'll be giving you all the latest as it unfolds, but it's definitely a deep puzzle as to what in the world was in this young man's mind.